Two corrupt officers framed a black woman, thinking they could bury her under false charges. But in court, she revealed herself as an undercover state inspector, exposing their years of abuse and corruption. What happened next will shock even the most hardened. But let's start from the beginning. Dawn Matthews, a poised and confident African-American woman in her mid-30s, strode into Ridgewood Market under the bright midday sun. Her sharp black pantsuit, paired with a sleek leather briefcase, exuded professionalism and purpose. Yet, her genuine smile and polite nods to the store clerk and passing customers revealed an approachable warmth. To those around her, she appeared to be an ordinary shopper running errands on a pleasant afternoon. In truth, Dawn was far from ordinary. She was a state inspector conducting a covert investigation into systemic corruption within the local police department. Meanwhile, officers Greg Harris and Tom Becker, notorious figures in the quiet, predominantly white suburb, leaned against their police cruiser, parked conspicuously near the market entrance. Harris, in his mid-40s with a perpetually smug expression, adjusted his sunglasses as he scanned the parking lot. Becker, younger and stockier, fidgeted impatiently, his aggressive demeanor thinly veiled behind his uniform. The duo had become infamous for targeting minorities under the guise of routine checks, their unchecked power fostering an atmosphere of fear and resentment. Lately, growing scrutiny over misconduct reports had only deepened their hostility. As Dawn exited the market, paper bags in hand, she immediately noticed the officers watching her. Their unrelenting stares were a warning she recognized all too well. Years of navigating prejudice had taught her how to steel herself against such encounters, though her pulse quickened. She refused to let her composure falter, holding her head high as she approached her car. "Ma'am," Harris drawled as he stepped forward, his sneer barely disguised. "Mind explaining why your license plate matches the description of a vehicle used in a robbery?" Dawn stopped, her calm gaze meeting his. "That's impossible," she replied evenly. "My car is registered in my name and hasn't left my garage until today." Becker smirked, circling her like a predator. "Guess you'll have a chance to explain that down at the station." Without further explanation, they forced her into handcuffs. Bystanders watched in hushed disbelief as Dawn, silent but resolute, was escorted to the cruiser. She knew this was only the beginning, and that the real confrontation was yet to come. In the dimly lit interrogation room, the air was thick with tension as officers Greg Harris and Tom Becker loomed over Dawn Matthews. The sharp fluorescent lights reflected off the metal table between them, emphasizing the cold sterility of the space. Dawn, seated with her hands clasped in front of her, maintained a calm yet vigilant demeanor, her sharp gaze fixed on the two men. Harris leaned in, his voice dripping with feigned authority. "Let's start again, Ms. Matthews. Where were you on the night of the robbery?" Dawn raised an eyebrow, her voice steady. "At home. I already told you this." The questioning intensified. Becker paced the room, tossing out fabricated details about witnesses who had seen her at the scene and evidence tying her car to the crime. "Your accomplices aren't as loyal as you think," Becker sneered, his tone laced with malice. "They're ready to talk, so why don't you save us the trouble?" Dawn's heart raced, but her expression didn't betray her. Years of experience in her role as a state inspector had prepared her for moments like these. She remained silent, her mind cataloging every exaggerated claim, every procedural misstep. The officer's charade reached its peak when Harris produced a wallet from a plastic evidence bag and threw it onto the table. "Recognize this?" he asked mockingly. "Funny how it turned up in your bag." Suppressing her outrage, Dawn met his gaze with steel-like resolve. "I don't need to explain anything until my lawyer arrives," she said evenly. Her request, like many before, was ignored. Hours dragged by as the officers cycled through intimidation tactics. But Dawn held firm, her silence an act of defiance. Behind her composed exterior, her mind raced, recording every infraction to use later. In another part of the station, rookie officer Elena Cruz stumbled upon Dawn's file. Something felt off. The rushed processing, incomplete paperwork, and Dawn's poised demeanor stood out. Curious, Cruz began digging deeper. What she uncovered, a trail of doctored reports and patterns of racial targeting by Harris and Becker, made her stomach churn. Torn between duty and fear, Cruz realized the truth could no longer stay hidden. The courthouse was alive with tension the next morning as Dawn Matthews, wrists bound in cold steel handcuffs, was led through the crowd. Cameras flashed, capturing every step as reporters shouted questions, their voices competing for attention. Headlines had already spread. Local woman arrested in connection to robbery. Whispers filled the room as spectators speculated about the trial, their eyes darting between Dawn and the smug figures of officers Harris and Becker, seated confidently at the prosecution's table. Dawn, however, remained composed. Her tailored demeanor, despite the indignity of handcuffs, hinted at a quiet confidence that made the officer's arrogance appear premature. The judge called the court to order, and the proceedings began with the prosecution outlining the alleged crime. Harris and Becker exchanged smirks, clearly confident their fabricated evidence would convict her. But as the defense stood to make its opening statement, Dawn rose unexpectedly. "Your Honor," she began, her voice firm yet calm. "I would like to introduce myself, not as the accused, but as Dawn Matthews, senior investigator for the State Department of Justice." The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. The judge, intrigued, motioned for her to continue. Harris and Becker's smug expressions froze, replaced by wide-eyed panic. Dawn methodically presented her credentials and explained her role in an ongoing undercover investigation into systemic corruption in the police department. She outlined how she had gathered substantial evidence of racial profiling and falsified charges, directly implicating Harris and Becker. Her words sliced through the room like a scalpel, peeling back the carefully constructed facade of the officer's case. But the most damning moment came when rookie officer Elena Cruz was called to testify. Sitting nervously in the audience, Cruz had wrestled with fear, but Dawn's bold revelations gave her the courage to step forward. Taking the stand, she recounted her findings: doctored reports, wrongful arrests, and patterns of abuse. Her testimony corroborated Dawn's claims, delivering a fatal blow to the prosecution's case. As the officers sat frozen, the weight of their lies crumbling around them, the courtroom buzzed with a newfound energy. Justice was no longer just a possibility, it was inevitable. The judge's gavel struck with a resounding thud, echoing across the courtroom. His face, flushed with anger, betrayed his outrage at the revelations he had just heard. "Officers Harris and Becker," he said, his voice steady but heavy with authority, "you are hereby ordered into custody, pending a full investigation into your actions." Gasps rippled through the courtroom as the bailiffs approached the two officers. Their usual cocky smirks were replaced by stunned disbelief as handcuffs clicked around their wrists. The irony was palpable. The enforcers of fabricated justice now experienced the same humiliation they had so casually inflicted on others. Whispers filled the room as spectators watched the disgraced officers being led away. Their heads hung low. Dawn Matthews, now standing tall and vindicated, turned to address the courtroom. Her voice, calm yet resolute, commanded the attention of everyone present. "This case," she began, her eyes scanning the room, is not just about me. It's about a system that allows individuals like these officers to operate without accountability. They relied on power unchecked by oversight, targeting vulnerable communities. Change begins with accountability. Her words hung in the air, resonating deeply with those in attendance. For many, her courage in the face of such injustice was a source of inspiration. Rookie Officer Elena Cruz, seated in the audience, felt a wave of determination. Dawn's stand against corruption solidified her own resolve to fight for integrity within law enforcement. In the weeks that followed, Harris and Becker faced criminal charges, including falsifying evidence and abuse of power. Both were dismissed from the force, their downfall becoming a cautionary tale for others. Dawn's case spurred broader investigations into the department, uncovering years of systemic discrimination and prompting sweeping reforms. Policies were introduced to ensure greater transparency, and training programs were revamped to address implicit bias. The community, once divided by fear and mistrust, rallied around Dawn. Her bravery became a symbol of resistance, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming power, one voice could spark change. For Dawn, it wasn't just a victory. It was the first step toward dismantling a broken system.